Hello again. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Stephen Rhind-Tutt, President and founder of Alexander Street Press. Stephen has been in the publishing business for nearly 30 years. He began with SilverPlatter back in 1987. Over the course of his career, he's developed several hundred different products. He's worked at Proquest and Gale, and in 2000, he founded Alexander Street Press, and he mentioned that Alexander Street's 15th birthday was just 5 years ago, so a belated happy birthday to Alexander Street Press. And Stephen mentioned that he's very grateful to the community for all the opportunities it's offered him, and we're really looking forward to hearing his presentation. So, Stephen Rhind-Tutt, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Well, let me just reiterate those thanks. When I was invited to do this, I was just enormously grateful because I'm kind of at that bridge over the River Kwai moment where the amount of river that's flowed underneath the bridge, I don't know if you know that moment in the movie, more has flowed under the bridge in my career now than is going to come. So this was a magnificent opportunity for me to take a retrospective. And I confess to you, I spent about 60 to 70% of the past 2 weeks enjoying working on this presentation rather than doing my prep work for ALA, which is what I really should have been doing. So great thanks there. Okay, so I want to preface the way I'm talking to you today in that light. I'm not an academic, and I have some technical slides here. And what I'm trying to do is actually elucidate the trends I've seen in the industry historically and extrapolate them into the future. So I thought the best way of doing that would be to give you some background on where I come from and where Alexander Street comes from. Not in the context of a sales pitch, but basically to say I know many of you work for libraries, many of you in the journals and serials area. I come from the primary sources area and the streaming video and audio area. That's somewhat different. So again, many of the lessons that I've learned, I think, are germane to the broader library community. But at the same time, I'm coming from the perspective of a small publisher. We're only 100 people. And I'm coming from the perspective of video databases, music databases, large primary source collections. So I encourage you to interpret what I say in that lens. All righty. So let's start with the landscape. And I thought it was kind of interesting as I surveyed what was going on the web. So I took a look and said, what by 2020, so in 5 years' time, is the web really going to contain? And again, I don't know if these are super accurate numbers, but I've had a slide like this in presentations now for a number of years. And it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger. You know, Facebook, over 1 trillion photographs. Just think of that number, 1 trillion photographs. There were 1.1 billion photographs loaded over the holidays, the Christmas holidays, in January 2013. And what do you want to bet that in January 2015 that number was much, much higher? Facebook and YouTube are quite stingy with their statistics. So the earliest number, or the latest number I was able to get was 2013. But just think of that in context. Think of that in context of, say, the Library of Congress. How many images that is. If you take audio, Spotify has 20 million tracks. 20 million tracks. That's absolutely unbelievable. And the trends are exponentially growing. Look at these stats for YouTube. 1 trillion views, 140 views for every single individual on this planet. In 2011, the numbers keep on growing. 300 hours of video are uploaded every minute. Again, this is an area I understand well. I'm going to bet you that in, say, 1990, there weren't 300 hours of video produced in the UK in a month. That's a huge, huge change. So I don't know if you remember this moment from Jaws. there's Roy Scheider, and he's kind of turfing out the offal and he's not really paying attention. And suddenly the shark just comes right out. And I don't know if you remember what he says, but he just basically says we're going to need a bigger boat. And that's kind of one of the things which I think both publishers and librarians really need to encompass. We're going to need a bigger boat. We really have to think in a wholly different level about what we need to do. So what does all this have to do with academic publishing? I know video is becoming more and more important in the academy, but for many it's still peripheral to the main mission. So I thought I'd take a little bit look backwards and take a look at NASIG and what's been going on in NASIG. So I went through the NASIG website, which is magnificent. I was able to find all I needed to. And these are some of the titles that I noticed that had been presented on over the years. Notice how similar they are today. John Cox, the journal is a provider of community services. This is long before Facebook and Mendeley, and he's saying, it's a social network. The journal could be a social network. Or, new roles for librarians. New roles for librarians. That's exactly the same as today, right? If publishers perished, just what would be lost? Again, how many times have we heard these things? So what I notice is that intertwined in all of this is fears of publishers and fears of librarians. And there are fears about budgets, declining budgets, and rising journal prices. And they permeate the presentations at NASIG. And they're reoccurring. And I noticed that almost every part of the community we work in thinks that they're at risk of being made redundant. Subscription agents, we're not going to need them in the future. Libraries, if everything goes distance education, we won't need as many libraries. Publishers, if it all goes open access, why do we need publishers? Faculty, we've got millions of faculty, but if everybody goes to a MOOC and, they can get really good online education, why do we need faculty? Universities, they've got really, really expensive online education. Well, the big ones will stay, but many of the second-string universities and third-string universities won't be needed. So we've got these recurrent fears on both sides of our community, on the vendor side and on the library side. This is very nicely documented, I think, also. This blog from Karen Schneider, I think, is just magnificent. I've used this slide many, many times since it was posted in 2006. The font may be a little bit too small for you. Here are some of the things she says. All technologies evolve and die. Every technology you learned about in library school will be dead someday. You are not a format, you are a service. The OPAC is not the sun. It's at best a distant planet, every year moving further away from the orbit of its solar system. The user is the sun. The user is the magic element that transforms librarianship from a gatekeeping trade to a services profession. The user is not broken. I think that's just a magnificent phrase. The user isn't broken. We cannot whine about how Google is taking away users from us. That's not the point. The user gets what the user wants. Your system is broken until proven otherwise. That vendor who just sold you the $1 million system because librarians need to help people doesn't have a clue what he's talking about, and his system is broken too. So if you think about this, part of what I'm trying to say here is that we've got a steady drumbeat of the smartest people in our industry telling us the same thing over and over again. All technologies evolve and die. And it's funny, in my career, these technologies all were huge in my career. It's not like a distant memory for me. I can remember my collection of cassettes. It was a great collection. I can remember my collection of DVDs. I've still got most of it. It's going away. So the conclusion I've got is we're all, in some ways, I believe, worried about our future, and many of us are holding on to the past, but the steady drumbeat isn't making us change quickly enough and respond to the user. And there are great opportunities here, because what our customers want, what our patrons want, is actually really needed more than ever. Students have to learn faster, better, and cheaper. We can't continue to charge students hundreds of thousands of dollars. If we do so, there's going to be a very small number of people that get a great education. Faculty have to teach better. We have to practice. Those involved in practicing professions, whether it's law or medicine, have to perform better. And for the sake of humanity, we need researchers to be able to discover the next penicillin faster, better. So this is one of the keynote slides for me, which is, I think a lot of us think that this is going to end at some point, and it doesn't end. It just keeps on going. So at the bottom there, some of you at the back may not be able to see, to the left, fading technologies. Technologies that at one time were very, very important, but have gradually become, if not obsolete, much less relevant. And over time, we go to the right quadrant, and the blue items are things that are growing. These are technologies that are coming to the fore and enabling us to serve those patrons far better than we've done in the past. And again, in my career, it's become more and more obvious that this is a never-ending cycle. There's always a sunny upland. There's always somewhere to go. There's always a next stage. So what we need to do is run up this graph. We've got to dispense with the older technologies, dispense with the things that are less relevant, and get as fast as we can to serving our customers as we move up the chain. So this is quite a complex slide, but what it basically says is that we're moving from a time of data to information to knowledge to wisdom. I remember in Star Trek how cool it was, where they'd be like, computer, tell me about Latin America. And the computer would immediately give knowledge, or at least information. As a side note, I thought it was really interesting because it needed really a reference interview to work properly. Because, what it was asking about Latin America, what it should have said is, do you mean geographic, do you mean economic, do you mean political, and zeroed in. But nonetheless, what clearly people are seeing needs to happen is we want systems that can really help us do things better. And information is an integral part of that. So today, we're in the data information moving towards knowledge. But in the future, we're going to be moving towards wisdom. Our users actually don't want to search. They want to find. Reading journals is not their primary function. Their primary function is actually discovering things and learning faster. So what we have today is good. What we have tomorrow will accelerate people towards wisdom. And we, I believe, in the next 20, 30, 40 years, are going to be in a position where systems really can help people answer questions in an instant, where we can bake things into workflows that will really help our students and faculty learn better. So I'm going to take a stop there and take a breath and take a look at a technology forecasting, I think. Could I have a show of hands here? How many people here have heard the term technology forecasting before? Great, thank you. So it's worth spending just a little time on it. So when I did my MBA, much of it I found very pedestrian and boring, but the technology forecasting class was just so exciting to me. And what I learned was that there were a number of techniques that people had been using to accurately project where technology was leading. So these slides you see up here actually come from Wikimedia, and they were done in 1904. And what's amazing to me is you see that bottom left one? They project what's going to happen. They're French, so it says in the year 2000. They project what's going to happen in the year 2000. So believe it or not, that's a police helicopter searching for a criminal. So 1904, and they're like, wow, there's going to be a helicopter thingy. Oh, and that will be really good for the police because they'll be able to hunt criminals. And on the right there, you've got a farmer, and you probably can't see it, but he's got some kind of automated widget that's doing all the harvesting. Is that kind of like the satellite-driven tractors that we have today? You betcha. It's absolutely the same. 1904, foreseeing air battles and attacking ships. And that happened only 40 years after their projection. And you've got to remember, in 1904, planes had only just started, and they're projecting that. And perhaps my favorite one is the classroom. So you've got a student mashing the books into some kind of machine, and then there are wires coming down and teaching the students. Is that incredible or what? So they didn't know how it was going to happen, but they knew that that's what people wanted. So my point here is you can project the future. So taking another detour, I researched about cars. So believe it or not, in 1900, there was a great deal of debate about what a car should be called. So what do you want to bet that the bicycle manufacturers called it a quadricycle? What do you want to bet that the carriage industry called it a horseless carriage? And what won out? The brand new thing, the car. So when I hear about e-books or e-journals, I can see the same thing going on. We're trying to grasp what the new thing is, but we're framing it in the past. There was a big question in 1900 whether cars were going to be driven by electricity, hydrogen, or gasoline. But if you look to the weight-power ratio of engines, it was just hands down it was going to be a gasoline car. There was a big question about whether it would be wood or steel or combination. So the trouble was for carriages, using steel was completely not going to happen because you only had a couple of horses to pull the thing and you couldn't carry the weight. So the early cars, you see, replicate all of that and they use wood. Later cars realize, hey, I've got a 40-horsepower engine. I can make this thing of steel. There was a law in the UK, believe it or not, in 1904, which basically said that you may not drive faster than 5 miles an hour and that you had to wave a flag in front as you walked. They thought that the number of cars would be significantly curtailed because driving a car was so complex that you had to have a chauffeur to do it, and people were doing calculations saying there wouldn't be enough chauffeurs in the world to enable everybody to have a car. So there's lots of things here that kind of indicate. Wind forward to 1920, and you can still see residuals. We decided that it was going to be called a motor car. Gasoline was clearly going to win. Steel was the right medium. It was going to be mass-produced. They'd made the car so simple that basically a steering wheel and 2 pedals, that pretty much everyone could do it. You didn't need an expert. But look, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? If you look at this Rolls-Royce here, the chauffeur doesn't get a roof because they've got the carriage paradigm, and then the carriage paradigm, the driver sat out in the open up front, and nobody said, well, hey, steel, this thing can easily accommodate steel. Its engine can quite cheerfully propel this thing at 70, 80 miles an hour. We could actually give the chauffeur a cover without it hurting the car. But they were still obsessed with the old paradigm. And if you look at what we're doing in our industry, you can see this happening over and over again. Oh, you have to have Boolean logic. Oh, yeah, it won't work without Boolean logic. Remember that one? That was like 10 years of no website can do without Boolean logic. And then Google came along and made it really simple. So let's go to the future now. So anybody here think that the car of the future won't be networked? Anybody here think that the car of the future won't be self-driving? It's great news for people my age, by the way, because by the time I reach 80 or 90 and can't drive, self-driving cars should be ubiquitous, so I'll be able to get around. Will cars be shareable? It's already happening. Will cars be safer? If you do a trend of safety, cars have got safer every year since cars started. Will they actually be more environmentally friendly? You betcha. The trends are obvious. So let's come away from what for me is the fun stuff and get really close into our industry. This is the OCLC Environmental Scan Report from 2003. So what is it, 12 years old. And it being a report, it was probably done in 2001, prepared in 2002. So we're talking give or take 12, 13 years. And it's amazing. Look how close they've got it. What are we really dealing with today? Semantic indexing, event-based triggers, embedding All of these issues are becoming important. And look, they projected this from way back. First of all, we were going to have mainframes, and then it was going to be personal computing. Then we've got to deal with all that LAN stuff and WAN stuff and Ethernet and make it all connected. Then we've got to do logical connectivity, making databases talk to each other, Z39.50, all of that business of linking things together. And today we're actually, how do we get our information embedded into workflows? You can see this in more detail. Simple search versus Boolean search. I can remember in 2000 when Google first started saying simple search is really, really important. And I've watched how publisher after publisher and OPAC after OPAC has gradually embraced that. There's a delay. What Google did comes later. Social networking, Facebook comes out, and a couple of years later, 3 in this case, Mendeley came out and LibGuides came out. Somebody saw what was going on in another industry and said, we should librarianize that. This would be relevant to the information industry. Audio, Napster comes along, and classical.com followed up with a library version. Mobile apps, Apple puts them out, and they're all to do with consumer functions. Now we've got Booksy and others really making sure that the mobile apps come. So if we look to the leaders in the consumer space, it often tells us where the industry's headed. So is the future clear enough to act on? I absolutely think it is. Sometimes I hear people saying things like, oh, who knows where this is headed? Oh my goodness, I have no idea what's going to happen. And of course, one can't be super accurate about this. But if you see the questions I've got up here, you could actually have a game. Who here thinks that open access is going to grow? Yeah, it's going to grow. It's going to grow. Do you think machine-aided indexing is going to get worse in the future? Is that going to happen? Do you think tomorrow's students are going to give up video and kind of go back to text? What about Wikipedia? Is Wikipedia going to get really bad one day? It's not going to happen. Is cost of storage going to get higher or lower? I mean, actually, it's been getting better, hasn't it, for 30 years? The surprise would be if it stopped getting better. How about mobile devices? Are they going to go away? Are they going to get smaller? Are they going to get less important? What about education? Will distance learning become more important or less important in the future? All of these trends are entirely predictable. So what we've got to do is think what it means for our organizations. I think it's really important that we understand the medium we work in. And I don't see a lot of attention paid to the medium itself. So what do I mean by the medium? Well, let me just jump to this slide here. If you think back in time, a carpenter works in wood. And he works in different types of wood. Now, carpenter's not going to build a table out of cork, because cork isn't a good material to build a table out of it. And until very recently, building a bridge out of glass was really not a good idea. Each medium has a way we need to shape it and use it. And I'm reminded of this quote from Louis Kahn, which I think is just great. You have to consult the laws of nature. And he, being an architect, says, you know, when he goes into a space, he says, so what do you want, brick? And the brick says, I like an arch. And he says to the brick, look, I want an arch too, but they're really expensive. And the brick says, I like an arch. And I think this can be paralleled with the internet. There are certain things in the internet that the internet says, I want to be free, for example. I want to be free. And of course, you know, we can build bridges out of glass, and there's a lot we can do, but there's an underlying nature to the medium. And I think it behoves all of us to honor that medium, just in the same way that a carpenter honors the tools he uses and honors the construct he's building. And all too often, I see us not doing that. So let's take a look at the medium we work in. So firstly, it's atomic. It's atomic. It favors articles rather than monographs. It favors short items, not long items. It favors clips more than it does long-form video. It is atomic and enormously pliable. In fact, if you think about what it really is, at the bottom it's just ones and zeros. And then you've got machine code, and then you've got assembly code, and you've got programming languages. It just gets more and more complex over time, but underneath, it's infinitely pliable. From a philosophical sense, it doesn't really get more pliable. It's 0 or 1, 0 or 1. And everything we've built on top of it takes advantage of that pliability. So what does that mean? It means it can get more and more functional. We're going to be able to layer this medium higher and higher and higher. It's going to be able to get more and more complex. It's linked. It's linked. I remember when I was working in microfilm and moving microfilm into digital form. And this problem kept on happening. In microfilm, if you skip a page, nobody would really notice. It didn't really matter. But in electronic form, the machine would say, okay, take existing page, add 1, and search for that page. If the page was missing, the machine would crash because there wouldn't be a page there. And suddenly we noticed all these errors in the microfilm collections that historically had been hidden. The same is true of the nature of the internet. If you have something on the internet that isn't connected to anything else, nobody's ever going to find it. In a strange way, the interlinkages actually matter more than the destination, insofar as anything that isn't linked cannot be found, and it doesn't really exist. That's a really, really big deal, and we don't really take advantage of it. Why do we have to buy 2 things? Why can't we link to one of the ones we've bought rather than buying a duplicate? Why can't we see all of the items interlinked more clearly? How about usage? If things are properly linked, we can get people to exactly what they're looking for far more richly. So the point I've got on linking is that I don't think we respect it how much we should. We really don't. I don't see a lot of linking-oriented services. Sure, we've got discovery services, but the actual interlinkages need more respect. Let's take a look at how it plays out, this medium argument, in some details. So against physical books, it has enormous benefits. The cost per item per person of an electronic journal, even with an expensive big deal package, when you work it down, it's tiny in comparison to what the cost of a book used to be. The size of this medium can be absolutely unlimited. Every year the storage space gets cheaper. That means we can actually make the size bigger. Remember my Facebook? 1 trillion images? The cost to store those trillion images since that statistic came out has just gone down 3-fold. So for the same money, you could actually store now 3 times the number of images. We've got a lot of difficulty dealing with what is linear and what is atomic. So I see a great deal of effort to take, for example, say, a textbook that is module, 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 and actually split it out so the modules can be used independently of each other. That's where we need to go. That's what we have to do. We have to get these pieces of content atomic because that's what our medium demands. What's the best type of thing? What type of thing do we do that corresponds most to the medium? I believe it's the open network sites. So I saw recently a comment to the effect that the publications of the future would be like a journal article. It would be a very, very rich journal article. And for me, that's like the quadricycle. It's like the journal publisher sees the world as a journal and is saying to themselves, yes, this is how it's going to be. Just as the bicycle manufacturer saw the car as, it's basically 2 bicycles together with an engine. Whereas really where the future is headed is far more with services like Mendeley that actually make use of the medium to the maximum extent. Look at these merits. There's just a ton of them. There are evidences in the past of where we fought against the medium. I was so perplexed when NetLibrary put a one checkout model on the books that they were putting up in 96 or so. I mean, the best thing about the medium was the ability to share these books really broadly. And what did they do? Engineer it so that only one person at a time could view the book. That's a really strange thing. And sometimes in history, the medium has to take a step back because of societal pressure, and maybe NetLibrary was unable to get the rights without doing that. But in the long run, did we really think that the patron, that the library was actually going to go for that? Absolutely not. It was against the medium. I can remember lengthy debates about whether metadata should be exposed. Again, unexposing metadata, you're shutting down the links. The underlying medium asks that you open up the links. So now we see more and more publishers going to expose their metadata. Local hosting. Did we see the future in the 1990s as interconnected or not? I can't believe, because this was one I fell into, being a CD-ROM publisher, working for SilverPlatter. I was like, yeah, that online stuff. Remember Dialog? We beat Dialog. The CD-ROM's the way of the future. Hey, the storage is getting better. And of course, it was completely wrong because of the power of that interlinkage, the power of the interconnectivity. So my contention here is that there's been steady, predictable movement. And if you look back in time, that's absolutely what's happened. ERIC, 1966, ANI database. 1970s, the machines became able to cope with full text. They did so. They did the most expensive thing first, where they could really get the money. In our industry, law and business often leads us. Then we started doing directories. Then we went on to full-text journals, then full-text books, then audio, then video, now data sets. It's a constant stream upwards. And again, I remind you, we're headed to the point where we have really intelligent systems. Okay, I'm feeling a kind of quietness in the room. I'm wondering if we should have a few questions at this point. I'm seeing a few. No, okay, I'll keep going. Yeah, because I'm very leery. My colleagues at work tell me I can really bore people on this. So, all righty. So let's now focus on where we can run to, what customers really want. And it's really, really important, I think, for all of us to understand that in the long run, customers get what they want. They do. So I don't know how long it will take, but I strongly believe that most information will become free. It's going to happen because customers really, really want that. And in the long run, customers get what they want. It is an evolution, not a revolution. I did a search on the NASIG website for the word evolution using that Google restrict. The word evolution co-occurs almost the same amount of time as revolution. So clearly, as a group, with some saying it's evolution, some saying it's revolution, in my mind, this is absolutely an evolution. Let's get practical. I've got some examples from what Alexander Street's done and from what some other publishers have done. So I'm going to take 4 areas of what I believe are the next phase. That would be a non-traditional content, connectivity, the linking I spoke about, OA, and workflow. So non-traditional content. This is from Lorcan Dempsey and Eric Childress from OCLC again. And for me, it's a very good map of how collections have changed and how the definition of collection is changing. Note that the definition of collection in this graphic includes Wikipedia, includes Twitter, includes RSS feeds. And what he's done is organize it in a particular way. So up here in the top quadrant, we've got things that are really ubiquitous. And at the bottom, we've got things that are just in a few collections. And we've got things that need heavy indexing and heavy curation to the left and low curation to the right. So as we take a look then, the medium. So I believe very strongly that video is going to be an increasingly important part. We can do things with video online that we've never been able to do before. Video is a terrible medium for finding information fast, if you just do video itself. Watching Katie Couric on the news for 30 minutes can actually be done in 2 minutes if it's written down. So the thing we've got to do as we think about new media is apply the techniques that we've already evolved. In fact, we notice at Alexander Street that the preponderance of usage on video is actually reading as much as it is watching. And we should be happy about that, because for many, many academics, they don't want to watch. They want to get to the information. The destination is not to have stuff watched. The destination is to convey the information to them. And if we organize it in a database, we can make this really fantastic. So if you take history, for example, we can literally, across our database, give you 3,000 of America's leading historians talking about their pet topic in an instant. That corresponds to the automatization I've been talking about, and it corresponds to using a medium in its right way, rather than silos of 45-minute video. Let's go to mobile. Mobile is clearly going to become more and more important. The medium has to get simpler for us to be able to use it on mobile. Let's talk about linking. So I so strongly believe that every publisher, every library has to be a really strong part of the web. We have to be of the web. Let's do inbound linking. We've got to make it so that there's a single database for all of Alexander Street content. We've got to enable everybody to link into it. We've got to make that metadata free. If we don't, we're going to be shutting off usage. There are big challenges with this, and many of them are really philosophical. I, for the life of me, don't understand why Wikipedia is selling mugs and T-shirts, not books. I mean, at the end of each article, there is a link often to a book. Why can't I just click on that and they get some money from Amazon for people that choose to buy that book? That would be magnificent, wouldn't it? They'd get a ton of money from that, and they'd be able to really do far more making content free. It's a strange, strange thing, because I think they don't do it because philosophically they're opposed to making money off information. And okay, that's hey, Wikipedia, they've done a brilliant job. They should do whatever they should do. But for me, we've got to have a hybrid world. We've got to have a world where the free and for fee coexist. And it's difficult. It's really strange. How come, in some cases, in the commercial world, people actually charge for usage generated? So what I mean by that is, if I pass a whole load of users to your website, you pay me. Conversely, it works the other way. In some cases, people say, okay, if you link to me, you have to pay. It's very strange. We haven't sorted out the business models yet. We haven't sorted out the linkages being stable yet. DOIs are great, but they don't apply across a wide enough medium. And there's a ton of vested interest underneath the surface here, which is stopping us doing what the medium asks for. On permissions, it's a nightmare, isn't it? Easy proxies, all of this. Why can't we get permissions sorted out nice and simple? On the outbound linkage side of things, we did an experiment a few years ago that's been very successful for us. We made links out to various websites of oral histories, and we were able to categorize these websites in ways that were useful to users. So geographically, historical events, and so on. And the net result was we were able to add search power, enable people to search those items. We need to get further on with linking out. All websites shouldn't be oriented towards a single discovery service. There should be, every publisher, every library should be interlinking. If we do that right, everyone will benefit from the traffic and will give our patrons a far better use. This one I'm going to take a big breath on. Jenny Wilson told me that you guys beat up the speaker yesterday a bit. So this is a really emotive topic. So I'm probably going to get in trouble here, but I think it's really, really important to talk about open access. So I think it's pretty clear what the customer wants. Really, they want every piece of information relevant to their search topic, and they want it in as much depth as possible, and ideally they want it for free. That would be magnificent, right? Every piece of information ever created, on every topic, all available free. That would be a great place to head. So when I look at what we've been able to do at Alexander Street, we've been able to fill some of the pockets here. We've got some good reference, we've got some listening services, some scores, some video, and so on. But we're still not getting to the destination that I think people want to get to. And this slide, is when Victor Henning from Mendeley presented it a year or two ago, the sound was palpable. He did something very clever, and with apologies to Victor, I'm going to actually ask if we can do it again today. I'll do what he did in the meeting I was in. Did anybody attend that meeting, by the way? I suspect some people did. Show of hands. No? Victor Henning presentation? All right. So the question I've got for you is, this basically says that by 2022, open access will pretty much be ubiquitous. Who here thinks that that's correct? Only 2. That's really strange. 3? Maybe people are shy. Maybe you're asleep. It's really strange because when Victor presented this, about half of the group put their hands up. Could I have a show of hands here as to who's a librarian? Wow, and you guys don't think it's going to be free? Wow, that's fascinating. What he was able to show in the presentation... Okay, I'll get rid of the word gold. What would I need to do to actually get every... Who here, let me do a nice generic. Who here thinks that open access will be ubiquitous by 2022? Still no, you see? Still no. Wow, I'm almost stumped here because I thought it was going to go the other way. So let me explain what Victor projected. What Victor was able to show was all the publishers in the group I was in thought it wouldn't, and all the librarians thought it would. And I believe it will. And I'll stand here, and maybe you'll invite me to NASIG 2022, and you'll see. Why do I think it's the case? Because from where I sit as a publisher, I just see better and better content going towards open access. And I see more and more pressure for large publishers to embrace open access. And I fundamentally see no way in which the commercial sector can't avoid giving customers what they want in the long run. So good news is I'm putting money where my mouth is. So I'm actually announcing today, this is going to be announced in full at ALA, but we're developing something called the Open Music Library. And the intent of the Open Music Library is basically to collate citations around music, scores, journals, and performances, pointing to both for fee and free content, using a number of different systems. And my commitment is that this will be an open access network that everybody can join or not join as they choose. And why am I doing this? Because I believe really, really strongly that the interaction with academics that we will get as a consequence of doing this will be infinitely richer than the kind of action we can do behind a paywall. I see on Alexander Street services many, many academics using our services and creating playlists and doing a number of different things. But the long and the short of it is that they can't share those results. And I think there's a way that for much of the content, we can make that content shareable. For some of the content, it will be behind paywall still. All righty. Let's get on to a different topic. And just so that I'm being clear with you, that didn't go at all the way I thought it was going to go. All righty. So I'm really, really impressed by the work being done by Macmillan at the moment in digital science. And I think it's really leading all of us, and certainly me, with a new paradigm. And just so that I'm clear, and anybody here thinks that I'm favoring of it, I have not talked to anybody at Macmillan about this. I don't even have stock in the company. I have no interest whatsoever. I just looked out there and I said, which of the vendors out there is doing something where I'm like really, really impressed? And all I've talked to you this morning about, they're really pushing the envelope. And you can probably gauge that I haven't been working with Nature Publishing Group because the graphic I've got here is really cheesy. And it was the one I culled from the web. And that's the best version of it I could find. And what it says is that the process that we're all engaged in is basically discovery. We want to enable faculty to discover, researchers to discover more. And they looked at what researchers really need. And researchers, the process starts with reading about discoveries, and then it goes planning experiments, and then it goes conducting the experiments, analyzing the results, sharing the results, and publishing the results. And what they then set up was a system of apps, for want of a better word, that help the researcher in each one of these phases. So you've got things like Figshare to facilitate the sharing of data sets. You've got things like LabGuru, which help you coordinate and collect the data in the first place. They've got things like 1 Degree Bio. It's basically a marketplace so that people developing products that help people experiment can sell their content. And if I go back to the graphic, what's really interesting for me is that the Nature Publishing Group, NPG Journal, is a very small part of that overall process. This is one of the reasons why I think open access will ultimately win out. Because really, it's only a very small part of what helps scientists do what they need to do. Now, today, we're not paying for the entire ecosystem, but tomorrow, publishers will be able to make far more money by developing the ecosystem than they can by selling a single journal. All righty. So, time to wind up a bit. My summary here is change in our field is slower than you think. I think the trends have been the same for a very long time. I think that they're often led by external industries. And by the way, a favorable point for my open access, what are the most successful companies out there? You know, if we wind the clock back to 1989, say, and you said there is going to be a $40 billion information company that's going to be providing access to pretty much everybody on the planet, I think everyone would have said, no, never happen, never happen. And while many publishing companies just stayed growing 5 or 10%, Google came along and now dwarfs all of them. And they embraced open. They're led by we're led by external industries. I do think you can project where we're headed, and I think there's lots of opportunities, but we really do need to change as quickly as we can. This is a lovely ad I found in one of our databases. This is basically a carriage manufacturer trying to get rid of the carriages and harnesses and whips as quickly as they can because they've been outdated. And here's a more germane example of Elsevier's company report. So if you take a look, Elsevier in 1995 is saying basically, our strategy is must-have information, media-neutral databases, sophisticated indexing, cross-referencing, and retrieving capabilities. And then in 2014, it's basically we help scientists make new discoveries. That's a very big change in what they're trying to do. And let's not forget that you don't actually have to change. So I just love the fact that, you remember those Sumerian stone tablets? Arguably the first form of writing. On Amazon, you can still buy stone tablets. They're going strong. And I'm going to finish there. Thank you so much. Any questions?
I'm from Westchester University in Pennsylvania. We buy a lot of Alexander Street products. How is Alexander Street going to make any money if you think everything's going to open access?
Great question. That's the kind of question I was expecting. So I think it will be over time. So look, we have databases like our comics database that actually the model that we use today I think is very appropriate. But in the case of music, where usage is very strong and usage is growing in leaps and bounds, I think we can make money by being hybrid. So let me put it another way. There are certain owners of content that will not surrender their copyrights for a long time. Look at it in the music business. There's many, many music people who are very slow to surrender their copyrights. So I feel that we will, for the next 5, 10, 15 years, be able to make money on selling those copyrights. Meanwhile, I think what will happen is that you libraries will want to publish some music yourselves, as an example. So we have a service to actually enable you to publish your content that we charge for. The way that that actually works is, and I don't know if anybody from Tufts is here, but we've just done a deal with Tufts whereby Tufts can actually load the performances that they've got from Tufts and disseminate that amongst their community. And that is a for-fee service. So I've run the numbers. It will take time. I'm not saying that OA will be there tomorrow across everything, but what I want to do is move up the chain over time.
Hi. So I find myself confused by your presentation. And as a follow-up, I suppose, to this woman's comment or question, I heard you speaking very strongly for the future of open access and that fee and for free will coexist.
Yes.
Also that we can predict where we're going, but the business models have yet to be sorted out. And to me, the business models are a mess. And I saw you showing a case for the future of certain technologies and user behaviors, yes. But no real clarity on the business models. So perhaps in conjunction with the hybrid, which really isn't, to my mind, open access, and it's a mess for librarians,
yeah.
You could speak more about what you see in the future of the business models, perhaps more along the lines of Macmillan Nature and the apps. But I was struggling through your presentation to make sense of the for free and for fee,
yes.
And the predictability and the unknown.
Great. Wow. I'm sorry you're confused from my presentation. I think for me what's most important is I don't say you can project everything. I really don't. I think you can project the technology, and I think the technology actually leads us in a particular direction. So in the case of open access, I do think there are business models that are working. I'm on the board of the University of California Press. I don't know how many here have heard about Luminos and Collabora, but these are two initiatives that are basically putting out monographs and journal articles in an open access model, and they are financially remunerative. I cannot help believe that as the cost to publish journals, as an example, comes down over time, there will not emerge a business model that allows publishers to continue to make money and yet still serve the content up open. When I look at my example in music, there's an awful lot of great music out there that's freely available, and we put services on top that we charge for it. Let me try and explain it another way, because you still look like I haven't answered it. And maybe my answer is that I haven't thought it through to the point yet where it's clear. But what I see over and over again is that there's new, innovative ways of actually moving to the next level. So in the case of music, in 1999, nobody thought that the music industry could make money without charging for CDs and DVDs. And today, the preponderance of money on music comes from other sources. I just think that's going to happen. I can't promise you that I know the exact vehicle by which it will happen. And again, I want to be clear here. Alexander Street is taking steps. I don't say that I can get every piece of Alexander Street content open access overnight. That's not going to happen. But I do see more and more movement towards open access. Sure. Sure. Thank you for that clarification, because I think that helps me see where you're coming from. What I notice is that when one says it's going to be free, there's always a layer you can a value add you can put on top. And so where I see publishers making money is layering that value add on top. And I'm sorry I didn't communicate that strongly enough. That is an infinite chain. So I don't know here who remembers when SEC Online was actually available on CD-ROM. And SilverPlatter charged $2,000 for it. And then one day, Edgar came along, and it was all freely available on the web. SilverPlatter's CD-ROM business